Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Supply Chain. So, let's start with a question. Today's guest works for an organization at the forefront of the robotics industry. So, according to the new World Robotics Report from the International Federation of Robotics, by what percentage did robot installations worldwide increase from 2023 to 2024? What do you think? Well, let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because all will be revealed at the end of the show. So today I'm excited to welcome a head of supply chain and manufacturing operations to our Women in Supply Chain series. She is proud to be part of a growing community of women driving meaningful change in the supply chain field. But who is she? Well, it's Natalie Walker. With knowledge of the utilities, oil and gas, clean tech, and EV industries, Natalie's strong multi-sector expertise enables her to optimize complex supply chains in fast evolving high tech environments. So today, Natalie and I will be talking all about her career journey, the importance of mentors in creating space for women, the changing face of workplaces, and the future of robotics. But of course, we could not have this episode without our sponsor. The Women in Supply Chain Forum fosters real connections, bringing men and women together to network, learn, and build lasting bonds beyond traditional conferences. It's about strengthening pipelines, creating a community of advocates, mentors, and trusted peers. And similarly, the Woman in Supply Chain Award was born from a need to recognize female leaders navigating challenges and driving change. Since its inception 5 years ago, it has grown to nearly 400 submissions celebrating the achievements of women shaping the future of supply chain. To find out more, head over to sdcexec.com. All right. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here today.
I am so happy to have you here. In doing my research for the show, you seem like such an interesting person, and in some ways, a little unusual for this series, right? You're educated in supply chain, you've had a very focused career. And while it's great to put the spotlight onto some of those more non-linear journeys, it's also important to show trajectories like yours as well. And so I am so looking forward to finding out a little bit more about you today. So you have a degree in supply chain management. And why I say that's non-traditional is because everybody I feel that is in my era sort of fell into supply chain one way or another. And now we're talking to folks like you who have a degree in supply chain management, which is so exciting. And it's becoming increasingly popular as an education option for younger generations. So why did you choose supply chain and how was that interest sparked?
I think that's a great question. And I certainly can't take credit for this entirely. So, when I was sort of making a decision on what to pursue in regards to my education, I actually had a family friend who was pursuing her PhD in supply chain following her JD degree. So formerly a lawyer, was pursuing her PhD in supply chain. And so talking about maybe this shared interest in sort of the legal space. And I think for me, more specifically, I sort of had this kind of abstract idea of getting more into international deal making, international negotiations. And so my thought process was I need to kind of pick something pre-law school. And so she really kind of encouraged me to check out supply chain for that reason. She kind of said if she could do it in the reverse order, she would. But then also, I think for me, the school that I attended, the University of Tennessee, has a program that is very well regarded in actually in the supply chain management space. So that kind of made the decision for me a bit easier as well. And then I guess I'll specifically mention I had a dual degree in supply chain management and international business. So that's
Perfect.
kind of how I fell into the space myself.
I love that. I didn't even know there was a PhD in supply chain.
Pretty crazy. Yeah, I think she's a university professor now. So
Wow. Well, I hope she's
yeah.
teaching the next generation of supply chain professionals because she definitely sparked your interest. And now we've got you in the community, which is amazing. And I love to hear those stories about how you were able to look at an industry from somebody else's perspective and follow in their footsteps, but not make the same sort of mistakes. It wasn't really a mistake. She just wished she would have done it differently. And she was
Yep.
able to show you how that would have the effect on maybe your career and what you wanted to do as well. I think that's so cool.
Totally. And I think it also, I like to say I get to kind of do the fun part of deal making or of,
Yeah.
negotiations. And I've been lucky enough to work beside some really incredible lawyers who have enabled me to do that. Many of them have been women. So I've sort of gotten, that part of the itch scratched as well.
Well, and the international business component. So I don't know if you know this, but I was on the board for the Forum of International Trade Training. And I also have my international trade diploma and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's so interesting how supply chain and international business should be put together anyways,
I
because
agree.
it's so relevant. And there's
It
so many
is.
different things that you need to know that you wouldn't actually correlate the two.
Totally. I agree. I also am kind of an advocate for like the study of psychology specifically as a component of business degrees, just because again, I think to your point, business is highly personal. So
Yes, absolutely. So supply chain as a career path, it's definitely opening up to women more and more. Like you said, you've been surrounded by a lot of women, which I love to hear. But I think it's still a bit of a general belief that somehow it's more of a man thing, right? And I say that with quote unquote. Having said that, I've had a lot of women on the show say how well women are suited for supply chain. So, what's your take? Like, why do you think supply chain is a great choice for ambitious young women or women looking to really help drive some meaningful change?
that's a great question. I guess I will mention I had a pretty unique view of supply chain. So my first internship was in the federal utilities space, and I worked in the analytics and technology department in the supply chain organization at TVA. And I mention this specifically because at the time, my team rolled up into a senior manager who rolled up into a director who rolled up into the VP of supply chain. And actually, all three of those individuals were women. So that is a pretty crazy, unique experience, especially in the world of technology and in the federal utility space, which we all know is very highly regulated. And so I think that that was a really neat place to start from a mentorship perspective as well. And we'll talk about that a little more. I think when people think about supply chain, and I'll even find this now in conversation for those who work, in other functions like maybe engineering outside of tech, or other types of industries that aren't so like, integrated with their supply chain and may have varying degrees of strategy in their operations. So I think they're especially in kind of traditional manufacturing and operations contexts, there's more of that connotation of like heavy manual labor, picking things up physically, moving them around, logistics, trucking. A lot of those things I think are kind of associated with supply chain, even still.
Okay.
And so for me, I think that kind of explaining like what supply chain is and kind of thinking about it more in the corporate sense, how to centralize and streamline operations across logistics, manufacturing, tool suites, even for analytics and reporting across the company, vendor management, even kind of partnering on the product design side of things, like, engineering partnership.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is kind of where you start to think about supply chain, maybe in the way that, especially I think technology companies are working with supply chains today.
And I appreciate you for sharing that story of having that ascension of women to look up to at the beginning of your career, because I think visibility and transparency is really, really important. If we're
Yep,
not talking about what that looks like and who's in those roles and why they're in those roles and what that's actually looked like, we can't see what's possible, right?
absolutely.
And
Yes,
so I completely understand that a lot of those visible opportunities can look like they are heavy lifting and things like that. But it's conversations like these where you point out, no, there's these different aspects that maybe you didn't even consider that you could be really good at, but also the creative part of all of those things that you just mentioned. Right? I mean, there is so much creativity and problem solving that goes into supply chain in a variety of different roles that sometimes we forget that that's where the fun is also where we can also have an impact and make some meaningful change as well. So I appreciate you for sharing that stories. Can you give us a bit of an overview of your, I think you just mentioned your first career steps, but was there a big lesson that you learned in your early years of stepping into the supply chain community?
Yeah, I like this question a lot because I think people kind of generally give advice and people are generally looking for advice when they're early in
Mhm.
career, and it's kind of hard to sometimes distill that to kind of practically how can you kind of take that and implement that yourself.
Yeah.
So I'll start with kind of just a high level overview of my career. And I think like lately I've been summarizing my career journey so far as kind of energy focused technology enablement. But kind of to work that left to right, I did mention, so I started in the federal utility space, but really I grew up in it. My dad and several of my family members worked at TVA in an
Okay.
engineering function, so I
Mm.
kind of grew up understanding and learning about sort of the power generation side of things. And in fact, my dad was one of the key engineers who built TVA's models to kind of optimize generation across assets for kind of, cost optimization purposes. So really neat to kind of grow up with that lens, not really so much thinking about it from kind of like what is the business side of things. And so I started there. And I think that starting in the utility space really kind of piqued my interest in kind of energy in general as
Okay.
this sort of foundational thing that we sort of take for granted. We don't really think about what will happen when we flip the light switch, right? We just
Mhm.
expect there to be light. And
And
so
there's
I think
not, what do I do? Who do
what's
I
happening
call? I don't even know who to call.
exactly. So we just kind of expect it to be there, and really it is kind of the foundation for all of the manufacturing, like the industrialization, and kind of led us to where we're at in terms of technology advancement today. And so I think in taking a job in oil and gas after working in the utility space, that was a purposeful choice for me. I think people like to ask me about that. But I think that understanding different energy sectors is pretty foundational to kind of making these national or even energy and infrastructure decisions. And so that was sort of, I think, what I saw as the next step in sort of understanding these different energy sectors. And then finally, I think when I came to Tesla and started learning more about solving some of these energy storage challenges and some of these renewable energy challenges. It was a neat place to be, having built that foundation of what are these sectors of energy, how do they relate, and how do they support, technology in the world that we live in today. And I think ultimately that's kind of what's led me to robotics. And that's because it's the next sort of transformational technology that does have huge energy requirements. I think like AI, training these models, the compute that's required, the power that's required
Right.
in order to support these data servers. It's huge. And I think that kind of continuing to play a part in this technology development is really exciting for me, and building those partnerships and understanding how to make kind of key technology and supplier engagement decisions. It's hugely rewarding. And so I think really to kind of tie that back to your question on lessons learned, I think for me, learning about myself and how to apply my strengths to whatever position I was in was very core. And so one of the first things that I did was I did kind of a survey that distilled my strengths called the Strengths Finders assessment. And it sort of distilled them down to five and really highlighted some things that sort of didn't surprise me, but sort of solidified some thoughts that I'd had about particular strengths, but then also helped me put maybe words to strengths that I might not have realized
Hmm.
were. And I
Transferable skills.
totally, yes.
Mhm.
And so kind of seeing those things and thinking about, okay, as I think about my role and my team and my organization and my company, how can I sort of take those goals, take my strengths, and sort of prioritize like, balancing those and where I can add the most value
Yeah.
myself. So I think that helps you to maximize your own results. I think it also increases your job satisfaction because you're able to see your results. And I think that also kind of opens that door for you to take on bigger challenges. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to acknowledge and appreciate you because one of the things that you said that sort of stuck with me is the intentionality. So you were very intentional about finding the nuggets, finding the little pieces that solidified for you what it was that you wanted to do next. Or you're intentional about being in a specific sector, but going to a different one so that you could learn a little bit more about that. And then you can bring it back depending on where you end up, right? You ended up at Tesla and not necessarily where you originally started, but you learn something from each one of those roles and each one of those things that you did. And you, with intentionality, worked on yourself and what it was that you wanted to do to help mold that career path for you. But then you were also intentional about this is what I want to try. And it doesn't matter what everybody else is thinking. They might think I'm a little bit crazy, but that's okay. I want to go there and I want to see what this is all about because that is a really huge part of growth. And
yep,
I think it's one of the biggest opportunities or missed opportunities in career growth is going and trying new things. And if it doesn't work out, we're thinking that we're failing, but you're learning the whole time.
yep,
So no matter whether it works out or it doesn't work out, as long as you take the lessons learned and you're intentional about your next step and learning more about yourself, I really think that's all you can really do and ask of yourself. And I just hope that more people do some of that. So you talked about robotics. You're currently now working at Cobot, collaborative robotics. Can you tell us about a little bit about what they do, a little bit about the vision for how humans and machines sort of collaborate. Because I talk a lot about how collaboration is the future of business. Do you think that it's also the future of technology?
yeah. I love this question. I talk about this a lot in developing and beginning relationships with strategic partners, suppliers, or otherwise. And I think that collaboration is very core to our company DNA. So, we chose the name Collaborative Robotics on purpose. And I think that from kind of a personal perspective, collaborative is the way that we as employees seek to show up in our relationships not just with our customers, of course, who we're kind of coming alongside and partnering with on this automation and ultimately robotics journey, but also when it comes to our technology partners that are oftentimes part of that automation solution for our customers, and also with our suppliers who ultimately are enabling us to build this collaborative robot. And so I think Cobot, we're a robotics and automation company, and we're working on kind of solving a specific but very common problem across various industries. So, a lot of people know that there's material being moved around all the time, and we might not really necessarily be noticing that.
Right.
The people that are pushing or pulling carts or moving boxes, totes, around us all the time at airports, at shopping centers, even in our offices, moving supplies around. And of course, more specifically in manufacturing and warehousing environments, you see this all the time. But that is what our robot is doing.
Yeah.
So, kind of helping augment the workforce in these spaces. And so, I think what is different about Proxy, our collaborative robot, than others that you might see, getting developed in sort of what is more of the humanoid space, is that we're not trying to design a product that looks like a human. Um, it's designed with the intent of being safe, being smart, and being reliable. And so our robot Proxy is able to move over 1,500-pound carts. That's something that's really difficult to do if you're balancing on two legs today as a humanoid. And basically, Proxy can navigate dynamic environments and operate all the time. So continuous uptime and having hot swappable batteries is something where our product can be kind of working around the clock, where we need breaks and
Right.
to kind of recharge, right? So you're already kind of starting to see kind of the ROI there. And I think because it's software defined, it becomes more capable over time as AI advances. And
Mhm.
so we're not saying, hey, we need to wait until some future point of time where AI is at this spot to start making a difference. We're building a platform that can make a difference today and
Yeah.
improve as AI improves.
And where do you
Um,
think we are as an industry when it comes to robotics? Do you think that we are ready to embrace it? Do you think that we're sort of dipping our toes in and we're like, I don't want to make the wrong choice? You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're talking a lot today, and I think everyone's kind of hearing it in the news about, reshoring manufacturing, revitalizing manufacturing. And I think the shift that we're starting to see is that companies are kind of past the point of exploring robotics.
Okay.
Robotics at various kind of stages have been around. And I think that everyone is really under a lot of pressure, especially cost pressure. We talk a lot about tariffs today. That situation kind of changes frequently and it requires a dynamic response in a lot of cases. And so I think, cost volatility coupled with labor shortages and just generally the rising complexity of the environments that we're working in are pushing companies to try to find these automation solutions that are flexible and reliable and fast to employ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think that's
and
that's kind of key, right? Like we
yes,
don't want to be waiting for an 18-month implementation because in those
right.
18 months, things are changing. The
Yeah.
technology is changing. The questions people are asking are changing. The needs are changing. And so it has to be quick. It's got to be that word dynamic that you used earlier.
Exactly. So I think that's exactly why our platform is resonating because you can deploy one proxy to start moving carts, totes, or boxes without having to wait 18 months to see results. You don't have to rip up your floor or change your layout. It's modular and it's collaborative and it can start helping you achieve what you need to today.
Yeah,
So,
I love the collaboration aspect. Like I said, I think people are tired of hearing it from me. Collaboration is the future of business, but I absolutely, truly believe it. And so I'm
yep,
going to keep saying it, whether you're
so are
tired of
we.
it or not, but I love that word. So you are head of supply chain and manufacturing operations. What does your role look like day to day? What are you doing?
I think the fun part about supply chain, and we sort of alluded to this earlier, is it's not just one function like logistics or spare parts management, or it sort of encompasses the end-to-end business. And I think that that's kind of what I like most about supply chain is that I get to work across the entire company. I get to work with our finance team.
Mhm.
I get to work with our software team on tools and enablement. I get to work with the hardware team on partnership and technology selection. I get to work with our consulting team on deal structuring and business development. And so I think the thing that I enjoy most about supply chain, and I really try to talk about this with people who are considering maybe, moving into the field or, pursuing it as a field of study, is that it's really kind of about dynamic problem solving and optimization. And we're operating in this environment where kind of the things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis are changing so rapidly. And we have to kind of be able to take the experience and apply it to these different situations that we might not have experienced ourselves before. And so I think for me, like that kind of the different challenges that I have on a day-to-day basis are really what's interesting for me, right? Like a part might be available forever up until now, and then tomorrow I find out that the manufacturer has discontinued this part, and maybe we've been buying it from distribution, and now they've run out of stock, for
Right.
example. So you kind of never know what will come up for you, and I think that that's part of the fun. And I also think that in all of that, you're also kind of having to stay focused on your goals and on the results of those goals. I think weekly goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals, and then really being able to extrapolate that to what does this year need to look like? What does the roadmap need to look like to support manufacturing scalability for the next 3 to 5 years? And
Right.
sort of, I think art of zooming in to the level of operational detail to get things done, and then zooming back out enough to make sure that all of that is compounding and moving you towards something that's bigger within a framework, within guidelines to be moving you in the direction that you need to as a business. I think that is something that I enjoy, and frankly, I'm still having to learn. So I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of ongoing for me.
Well, I mean, and we're all learning, right? Even in leadership roles. And I think that's the way that it should be. There should be ongoing training for a variety of different things because we're getting hit from all different angles. You talked about it earlier, right? You are problem solving on a daily basis. Disruptions,
Absolutely.
firefighting, something's coming at you all the time. And as a leader of a team, you need to be able to work your way through that, but also lead your team to help them to understand how they can work through it as well.
Absolutely.
Right? It doesn't need to be this whole anxiety thing, and sometimes we do get some anxiety, right? Because so much disruption does cause that fight or flight, and there's a mental health aspect to it. But as leaders, we want to be able to showcase that, okay, this is the challenge that's coming in. It's okay. There's probably a variety of solutions. Let's figure out one, two, three, and then we can come together and really look at the pros and cons of each. And no decision is necessarily perfect. It really depends on what those goals are that you can measure against and figure out how much risk you want to take.
Absolutely. Yep. And I like the collaborative aspect of that example as well. So
Yeah.
it definitely requires working with a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to hear that as sort of a leadership style as well, in saying there's also some things that you need to work on as well. And I think that creates a vulnerable and safe environment for your team to be able to talk to you about what they want to work on and for them to come to you and say, I'd like some training in this,
Yes, for sure.
you
I
know?
can't be balancing the load of decision making on my own, right? So yeah, really empowering the team to make their own decisions and to get moving is pretty key.
Yeah, I love that. So you've worked across utilities, oil and gas, clean tech, EV, and all I would assume are very male dominated industries. What has your experience been like as a woman?
Yeah, and I think I can add robotics to that list now.
Yes, let's
Um,
add that one too.
I think the exciting thing, especially for me now here at Collaborative Robotics, at a robotics startup, it's pretty amazing the amount of women that we have here.
Awesome.
I don't know that it's quite 50-50, but it's pretty close. So we're finding a lot of talent, and that's really exciting. It makes it a really neat place to work. Um, I think I'll give an example of an experience that I had towards the beginning of my career. And of course, maybe this will be relatable to some degree, but I like to talk about the first time that I was getting ready for an interview. So I was in college and, trying to figure out what to wear. And I went shopping to try to find a suit for this interview, which, by the way, is very, very challenging to find suits for women. And so I finally found one, was feeling super excited, had been prepping for my interview, of course, because everyone should be prepping for their interviews and thinking about, how they're going to be explaining their experience and who they are, and how they would fit into the role. But I think for me as a woman, I remember the day that I got up and started getting ready for the interview. I got dressed and then I'm getting ready and thinking about, okay, I'm gonna put on makeup. Should I? Like, how much makeup should I put on?
Oh,
I'm gonna do my hair. If I curl it, does it look like I'm putting too much effort into this? Should I wear my hair up? Does that make me look too young? So I'm kind of going through this whole process of like, how is the way that I represent myself going to be perceived? And how might that affect, my eligibility for the job? And so I remember I was sharing this with a friend who at the time was also interviewing, and he was like, yeah, I didn't think about any of that. I
right.
just put on my blazer and had prepped for the questions and just went. And so I think that it kind of starts from there. There's this
Mhm.
whole added experience that I'm not saying is exclusive for women, but certainly something that I've not heard of, of the men in my life having similar experiences
Yeah.
and kind of sharing this with them.
Well,
And so,
I really appreciate you for sharing that. And when you talked about it, it sort of brought me back to an ongoing conversation that has been happening over LinkedIn around conferences,
yeah. Okay.
right? What women have to think about when they get dressed for the day at conferences,
Yep.
what you're wearing, your makeup, but also how far do you have to walk? That was the one thing for me. I show
Yeah.
up in flip-flops because I've had to walk 2 miles to get to the convention center. And then I put on some heels. Am I going to be looked at a little bit differently? So it can go from
Yes.
like hair and makeup to shoes and what you're wearing. I mean, I've eventually evolved, and my whole uniform for conferences are Nike Air Force Ones because I'm going to be comfortable no matter what. Dress pants and a blazer. And that's what I'm known for now, but it takes some time, right? Those are some of the things that you go through throughout your career and throughout some of the experiences as to the questions that you have until you get comfortable enough to really understand who you want to be.
Yep. And I think for me too, like that's just become, will people think, oh, she has on heels or she's always dressed up? Maybe, but like I like that. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to stop doing something that I like and it helps me to show up authentically as myself just because of potential, reactions to that. And I think that
Absolutely.
it's taken me time to get there. And you'll still get comments sometimes that can put you in a place where you're like, oh, a little, thrown off. But yeah, that's part of it too.
Absolutely. So you mentioned mentors a little bit earlier, and you said that we would get to it later on in the conversation. So let's do that. Have you had mentors? Have you had sponsors? How important do you think that that has been to your success?
I really don't think I can overstate the importance and value of mentorship. And this is a deeply personal experience for me. Um, I mentioned coming from a family of I think mostly men in my family who were trained in engineering. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of younger brothers, my dad, cousins, uncles, and then there was me.
Right.
And so, I wasn't encouraged to pursue engineering. So I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do myself. And there was no one in my family who had been sort of in any sort of business role. And so I had to kind of look for people who could give me advice in this way. And I think part of that was connecting with a couple of professors very early on in my time at the University of Tennessee. One of those to this day still remains a close friend and mentor of
Oh,
mine.
I love it.
Um, and I think like, moving into professional environments and really seeking out mentors, I think a lot of what kind of prevents people maybe from doing that is thinking, I don't really have anything to contribute. And I think for me, what I really tried to focus on was um, just kind of saying, hey, I'm new. Like I might not have much to offer other than a fresh pair of eyes and perspective on something if you're interested in that. But I really am interested in kind of learning about maybe how you got started and what
Mhm.
things you might do differently if you could do it all over again.
Yeah,
Um,
such great questions.
it was super helpful. And not only did it, teach me things that I might not have learned at least so quickly on my own, but it also allowed me to avoid mistakes that I might have made
Yeah.
that I, didn't have to make myself.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And those are such critical questions. I think that sometimes are a missed opportunity for a lot of people when they are looking to connect with somebody to possibly be a mentor and sponsor. Because going to somebody and being like, can you be my mentor or sponsor is not necessarily the best approach, right? You want to be able to learn from them and you want to be asking really great questions to get them interested in wanting to spend their time on you.
yep, absolutely. And I think part of it is exactly what you're alluding to here is you want to have questions because you know that they're probably going to be able to give you pretty good advice in some
Mhm.
particular aspect of whatever your interests may be, right? And I
Mhm.
think the key there for me um, also was, you know, could I go ask um, my dad, who has worked in the same industry, in the same capacity for 35 years, for advice on taking a new opportunity that also is moving across the country, starting over in terms of network, in terms of family, in terms of friends? I could, but that's not been his experience. So is he
Right.
going to be kind of the best person to inform that decision? Maybe not. And so I think it's also important to realize that there are different people who can advise you in different ways. And, not all advice is equal. And it's also up to you to be doing that work to kind of understand like how to apply that to yourself.
So now I want to ask you about your advice. So you're on the Haslam Young Alumni Board, and I hope I did not do that injustice. And it's incredible that you get to have a taste of that board environment from a younger age. I was quite similar because I was on the Forum for International Trade Training board as well from I think late 20s. I think it was my late 20s. And that
Awesome.
experience, it was really great to have that experience early on in my career. So, what advice do you have for young people pursuing those types of opportunities?
I think so. I wanted to stay involved with my university. I think it was one, important to me to stay connected to mentors who were faculty and had played a huge role and continue to play a role in advocating for me professionally. And I think that for me, staying also involved with the next generation of supply chain talent coming out of the university, almost selfishly from a recruiting perspective, was also important. And so I think it's kind of how can I play a part in continuing to increase the awareness and the value of my degree ultimately. And so I think staying involved in the college in that capacity is super important for me. And also, I think I see it a little bit as a bridge between sort of the academic environment and industry
Right.
application of this field of study. How can you be creating? I know we talked about feedback loops. I call them flywheels, and that's what we call them here at Collaborative Robotics. But how do you kind of create those opportunities for academia and industry to stay so tightly connected and then involving students in those conversations to
Yes.
kind of get a better understanding of what their opportunities might be and what applications might be available. So I think the board experience has been really, really wonderful so far, and I hope to have the opportunity to serve on others as well.
And it's so important if you can get that opportunity to work on a board. I think it really helps in career growth. We talk about mentors and sponsors, and there's all around that table when you join a board, right? But I love what you're saying in the fact that you're able to be a bridge between that academic perspective and the real world perspective as to what that next generation is looking at when they think about career and they think about career growth and what that looks like. And now I recorded an episode of Blended a little while ago about different generations, and it had boomers, Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, all coming together in one place, and they have different takes, right, on what real life looks like versus the academic versus work-life balance, boundaries, all the different things. And I'm sure you've kind of seen this throughout your career because we've seen quite a shift in corporate, right? We've seen quite a shift in organizations, even as far as, the ages of folks being in positions like yours. And then some of that older generation taking a bit of a different role within the organization so that you could take advantage of their knowledge, but so that they can have a different flexible work-life balance that maybe they didn't think was even possible before. So, what advice do you have? What have you seen really quickly? Because I know we only have a couple of minutes. But what does that look like to climb the ladder in an environment like that?
Yeah. Um, when I think back to accepting my first job, which was the first time that I moved across the country and started over with
Woo!
no professional connections, no friends, no family. I've done that another time or two since. And so I think at that time, and having graduated from a supply chain school, I basically was thinking to myself, okay, continuous disruption. This is good. I'm going to learn. And I think that, little did I know supply chain would kind of organically find those opportunities for me. And I
Cool.
think moving into oil and gas, which is a very cyclical industry, when it's hot, you're doing really well, and when it's not, I had the opportunity to be part of what ended up being a 45% corporate layoff at
Wow.
my first company. And so I was one of those who got to retain that job. But a 45% corporate layoff has, of course, impacts for those who are let go, but it, multiplies the workload for those who are left behind by a factor. And
Right.
so I think that created an opportunity to take on a lot more than probably I should have at that point in my career, for better or for worse. So that disruption, I think, really kind of also coupled with eventually the pandemic, which changed a lot of the structures in which we work. And I think
Yeah.
what I mean more specifically is a lot of companies went from no working from home policy to entirely working from home. That fundamentally changed the way that people had to approach working across teams and collaborating, um, making
Communicating,
sure,
overly
yes.
communicating so that we could get things moving and move things along.
Absolutely. So fundamental shift in the way that most of these, even 100-year-old companies like the one I
Yeah.
was at, had to work and change their policies. And so I think navigating the semiconductor shortage at Tesla was another example of major supply chain disruption that really disrupted technology in general. Everything that required these chips for computing purposes was kind of on hold. And so I think the key there was kind of similar to what I've not explicitly stated in these other examples, was that communication and that collaboration aspect of the job became sort of paramount to successfully navigating those times. And I can think specifically of a supplier who I remember I called because I found out that a competitor of theirs was prioritizing other more legacy customers. And I called the supplier and I basically said, "Hey, I need help. How quickly can you ramp up production on these things?" And they had no reason to help me, except that we'd built a relationship, and they understood that I needed the help and they were willing to give it to me. And so
Mm.
I think that was a really interesting example of how important making those connections and building those relationships really can be in navigating some of these even, worldwide supply chain impacts like the
Yeah.
semiconductor
Well, and I
shortage.
think the advice there is to be vulnerable enough to ask for help and to go start conversations with folks that have some of the knowledge potentially that you are looking for or need to be able to move on. Not everybody knows everything about everything,
Of
right?
course.
And so I think we all need to collaborate across ages and across teams. And that's where that collaboration really comes in, but also that vulnerability to ask questions and to ask for help. And I think that that is super important. That's what came out of the episode as well. And not only is it so that we can navigate through the different eras that are now starting to work together, but also it helps us work through that disruption that you were talking about as well, which we're all facing on a daily basis. And sometimes we
Yep.
feel alone, and it's gonna help us to collaborate and help us not to feel alone. So really quickly, because I know we need to wind down, what's one thing that the future holds for you?
Yeah, I think just to wrap up, for most of my career, I was pretty purposefully thinking about what was next. And maybe not necessarily a particular title or a particular role, but just kind of how was my experience being compiled, and sort of directionally, where was that moving me? And so I think what's next for me immediately, next week, next month, next year, is like I'm super motivated and excited by what I'm doing now and the
Awesome.
challenges that I'm getting to solve. And we're building physical AI systems and we're testing them in the field. And that's super rewarding for a supply chain professional.
I love that. I mean, you're such a great an example to young women. You're so ambitious, you're educated, you're succeeding in a highly complex, evolving industry. And it's just great to hear your passion. I can hear it through the microphone that you are passionate for innovation, problem solving, leadership, and I'm sure it's going to take you to some big places in the future. So, did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you, according to the New World Robotics Report from the International Federation of Robotics, by what percentage did robot installations worldwide increase from 2023 to 2024? Well, it's 10%. With more than 4.2 million robots now operating in factories worldwide, that is an incredible number and it's only set to grow. I want to acknowledge and appreciate you, Natalie, for joining me on the show today and sharing with us, such an incredible journey and showing us what collaboration and vulnerability really means to career growth and career journey. And if you would like to hear more from us at Let's Talk Supply Chain, we have plenty more content for you featuring the best and brightest in the industry. Head over to letstalksupplychain.com to check out the latest. Natalie, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.